On this day, July 19th, in 1553, England's 9 days Queen, Lady Jane Grey, was deposed. Let's talk about that. It's me. This is my channel. And we are, of course, looking at the past to better understand the present. In this case, the present being an upcoming general election here in the UK, which will likely result in yet another Conservative landslide victory. See, Jane was a Protestant, whereas Mary was Catholic. And religion still plays a big role in English politics today, albeit not as big a role as it once did. And so the Tories find themselves in uncharted territory as they try to win their 6th term in office. As I said at the beginning, the reason why Jane lost the crown was because her supporters couldn't overcome the Catholics of England. And if you want to watch more, you can do so here. Thanks for watching. And today, the Conservatives are attempting to court the Christian vote in order to bolster their own numbers. Whether or not this will be enough to win them another term in office remains to be seen. But what isn't in doubt is that religion continues to play a major role in English politics, just as it did all the way back in the 16th century. The last time a British government was elected to a 6th consecutive term was in 2001, when Tony Blair won his 3rd term. And that landslide victory was largely on the back of New Labour's perceived success in the war in Afghanistan. This time around, however, it seems unlikely that the Tories will be able to repeat that trick as the public grows ever more tired of the scandals and missteps of Johnson and his government. As recently as the 1970s, for instance, a Labour government under Harold Wilson was elected on a manifesto that promised a referendum on whether the UK should remain in what was then called the Common Market. Wilson campaigned for staying in the market, but his opponents, the Conservatives, led by Edward Heath, campaigned for leaving. The Conservatives won the election and the referendum, and the UK left the Common Market. But those days of broadly religious parties are long gone, and it was largely a question of Conservative voters being more pro-market and pro-European than their Labour counterparts, and there was a sizable chunk of the English population, possibly even a majority, who were also Catholic. And so when Jane was proclaimed Queen, these Catholics rose up in arms, forcing Jane to flee to the north of England, where she remained for the next 9 days, until the 18th, at which point Mary's forces had overwhelmed those of Jane's supporters and Jane was forced to abdicate. She returned to London and did, in fact, live out the remainder of her life there, dying in 1554 at the age of 17. And so I thought it would be fun to look back at a previous landslide election victory, really, because it wasn't really an election at all. One that took place in 1553 and saw the Conservatives of the day, the Tories, landslide the election, well, not quite an election, which had passed the Act of Succession, which declared that Mary was illegitimate and barred her from the throne. It was a coronation. The Tories of the time were supporters of Mary Tudor, who became Queen as the abdication of her father, Henry VIII, who died on January of that year. Now, upon his death, Henry's will was read, and it was discovered that he had in fact been bypassed by Parliament, and instead, the throne should pass to Henry's younger brother, the Earl of Surrey, and then to Surrey's children, with the eldest daughter being Lady Jane Grey. Well, not much, actually. You see, although Jane never really controlled all that much of England, there were areas where her supporters were in full control, most notably London and the South East, and with her gone, these areas simply fell back into line with the rest of the country, which supported Mary. In other words, no electoral map was ever redrawn during Jane's brief time on the throne. Now, there is just one small problem with that. So how did this affect the electoral map of England? What this does show us, however, is that religious affiliation and politics are tightly intertwined in English society, and they have been since the days of Henry VIII. In fact, you could argue that the broad consensus between the two main parties on most social issues, including religion, is greater now than it has ever been before, and so the Tories might have to rely on a different strategy, one that worked all the way back in 1553, the strategy of religion. Okay, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and leave a like.